This is 007 Debriefings. I am Intelligence Officer Wiz.
And I'm Weapons Specialist Zero.
Zero, how you doing today?
Good. A little bit numb of the mind because my client for the project I'm working on has nothing for me to work on.
Oh, that's good and bad, isn't it?
Yes, it is, because It's like, great, I can work on other projects. Bad, the projects I have aren't very mentally stimulating.
Yeah. Alright, Zero, so we are here to comb the files of MI6 to discuss the cinematic adventures of one James Bond. This week, The World Is Not Enough. Zero, this is another one that I saw in the theater. I'm not sure which of the Bond films you saw in theaters. Are any of the Brosnan ones one of those?
I don't think I went to see any of the Brosnan ones, to be honest.
Okay.
I always saw them when they went to home video, so
Okay.
DVD, VHS, or whatever.
Okay. That's fine. I've seen most of them on Blu-ray and DVD. Yeah, I watched the majority of the Brosnan ones in theaters, and it's funny because these are movies that, looking back, I would love to watch in a theater, but the Brosnan ones are the ones I just seem to not remember much about. I find that really curious because it's the Bond that I grew up with, I guess, that got me into Bond. But now looking back and watching these films again, I'm remembering things I haven't remembered before. Are you going through the same thing?
I think of all the Brosnan movies, I think I remember GoldenEye the most, and even then it's a little bit tenuous in some parts. But the rest of the movies, I just can't find them sticking to my mind, and I think it's mostly because just they're so focused on the action, they're so focused at times on the womanizing, that it just kind of skips my mind.
They're kind of a blur in a way, aren't they?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean...
There's nothing distinctive about it.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, for any listeners, the action's great. The action's great,
Yeah,
but man, just plot-wise, they run a little thin when you try to think and recall back on them.
The only thing that I always remember, because I guess with me the negative really sticks out, whereas the positive, unless it's really positive, that it just doesn't stick out with me so much. That's really all I remember is the negative parts about the Brosnan era, which is mainly Die Another Day, which we'll get into next week. Alright, Zero, so let's get into our mission objectives for The World Is Not Enough. We go by specific categories to discuss certain elements of a Bond film. And we're going to start with 007, which is James Bond, played by Pierce Brosnan.
Just kind of the usual Brosnan fare, sharply dressed, quippy one-liners when things go his way, and bombastic action sequences, and, well, the occasional womanizing here and there. He's an alright Bond. I mean, in this one, nothing in my mind stands out very prominently, unfortunately. While he seems to be a little bit more settled into this role, at the same time, I just can't help but just think a little harder on it and go, wow, I just cannot seem to think of any particular detail that is extremely remarkable about him that makes him just stand out in this movie.
I gotta ask you something. Is there anything in the Bond films with Brosnan that give you like a distinct, oh, this is a Brosnan Bond? When I think of Brosnan Bond, he is
always sharply dressed, usually quippy one-liners when things go his way, like if a person dies or if he ends up kind of having things go perfectly because of some sort of literary deus ex machina element. The womanizing, always going to be prominent with the Bond movies.
Yeah.
And then, of course, just the fact that the way he's written is just, he's got all sorts of gadgets to get out of any jam. And sometimes these gadgets are, you know, fairly reasonable. You're just like, okay, yeah, I could believe that. And then in some cases, it's just absolute plot armor, deus ex machina sort of shenanigans. I mean, we saw that in the last movie with the remote driving BMW.
Yeah. Yeah. My thing with Brosnan that I'm noticing in these three films so far is that with every of the other Bonds, they all did something that added something to the Bond formula. And I don't see that with Brosnan. Like in this one, I think he's more ruthless and cunning in this version, so that means more of Dalton in his interpretation in this movie. And then there's more of Connery in this one as well, and then a little bit of more. And that's it. Like, I'm just seeing, okay, so he's doing more in this scene. Okay, he's doing Connery in this scene. That's all I'm seeing. If there's one thing that Brosnan added to the formula, what is it? And there isn't anything. On the one hand, that could be a good thing because, okay, so he's just being a comfortable Bond for, like, the fans. Someone that, like, the fans would enjoy or would be a good starter Bond And then if someone wants to go into the back catalog, they can see where it started. On the other hand, after going through all these Bond films in the past few months, he's easily the least compelling of all the Bonds for me so far. Even like Lazenby has something that is distinctive, whereas Brosnan, I don't think he has anything in this.
I think you said it best during the GoldenEye review. He seems to be running a sort of a play that would be, I guess you could say, a Bond's greatest hits. It definitely very much seems like that. He just kind of seems like he's just kind of running through the number. This is kind of like what people liked about, this current era of Bond or this, that, and whatevers. And it just seems to be just him running through the numbers. I would most certainly agree with you that it definitely most certainly feels like he's just sort of running through the Bond greatest hit. As much as I hate to say it, he has his own style, but also his style is a bit like ripping off of the previous Bonds of past movies.
Yeah, I think the one thing they try to do differently in all three movies is that in all three of them, Brosnan's Bond has emotional stakes. In GoldenEye, there was 006. In Tomorrow Never Dies, there was his ex-fling that he had that had an emotional connection of sorts. And then in this one, you have the fact that he has guilt for accidentally killing M's friend, and on top of that, he has an injury in this film. So there's a bit of, I would say, some stakes, or there is a bit of weakness in these Bond interpretations. In this movie, it's only used when it's opportunistic for the film. In most of the time, he's doing his usual jumping into water, swimming. He's also fighting and stuff. He has no problems whatsoever doing those things. But in certain scenes, all of a sudden, you have to remember, oh, wait, he has a broken collarbone. And the Bond girl mentions it, or the villain finds out about it and uses it against him. But there is nothing else in there that shows it's there. It's kind of like, oh, he did have this here, but forget about that now. Let's get to this good action part.
As much as it feels bad to, kind of talk down on Brosnan, at the same time, I think that might be one of the reasons just the Brosnan era just isn't super memorable for me. He just seems like he's just kind of running through the on greatest hits and just kind of remixing them to fit the role of whatever movie he's in.
I mean, it's not bad. They are enjoyable films. I cannot say for right now that any of them are bad, but it just seems like as Bond himself is just not an interesting character, and I think that might be why. I think, honestly, this is Brosnan at his best so far, but it's also a missed opportunity in a lot of ways.
That's definitely a fair thought.
All right, so let's get into the villain. Before we get to the villain, actually, I want to point out we're going to have to spoil some key plot elements. I know we haven't done this before on the podcast. That's kind of a given. But in this movie, I think this is particularly something we need to let everyone know about offhand. So if you want to not be spoiled, you have your fair warning. So let's get into the villain, which is Victor Zakis, a.k.a. Renard, played by Robert Carlyle.
He's not on scene very much, and the most he's on scene is towards the end, and it's kind of a shame that he's made out to be sort of a superhuman villain. It would have been nicer to see kind of him in more action scenes with the whole supervillain element. He gets so little screen time, even though just he's kind of made out to be the big bad and everything. I think his performance is fine. He does play it up a little bit, especially on some of the scenes. I thought he was alright, but I thought really just with the whole piece that he's got a bullet in his brain and slowly worming its way to his medulla oblongata, and because of this, he feels he has no feelings in any shred of his body, so he can just take the hits and just keep on going. I remember initially seeing the movie, I was just like, holy shit, man, this could be like an outright slugfest, and the action scene could probably be insane with a guy who feels no pain. This could be intensely wild. And then just, we have a fist fight scene in a submarine, and, that's basically it.
Yeah. You're right in the fact they underutilized that villain. But I think a reason probably why they didn't go too far with it is because I don't think Robert Carlyle is that interesting or really that believable in that role. Now, I like Robert Carlyle. I think he is a good actor. He was in The Full Monty. He also was in a bunch of other movies I actually thought he was very good in. But in this movie, not only is he underutilized, like I said, he's not even that intimidating. And on top of that, I'm not sure about this. Just because you can't feel pain, does that really mean it slows you down? I mean, if you're injured in some way, something's not going to work. It just means that you're not going to get that feeling. Maybe I can understand, like, okay, I don't feel pain, and you broke my leg, so I'm going to keep going until I realize, oop, and I fall over.
Younger me imagine like a serious knife fight, or maybe like a serious shootout sort of sequence where, just he's getting shot multiple times and he's not going down and stuff like that. I think that was what I had originally pictured as like a younger version of me watching this movie. I was just like, oh man, the end fight's gonna be sick. There's gonna be like some sort of crazy knife fight. Dude's gonna get stabbed multiple times and he's just gonna keep on ticking, or he's just gonna take several gunshot wounds to the chest and he's just gonna, laugh him off and just keep on going. His superpower not being able to feel pain, it's gonna be fucking wild. And then just nope.
Yeah, so let's get into Bond girls. We have 2, and this is where the spoiler is gonna really come up. So 0, the next one is Electra King, played by Sophie Marceau.
She's quite a pretty girl. Plays the Stockholm Syndrome sort of situation really, really well. She's extremely manic in the role and everything. Kind of an absolute criminal mastermind of sorts in this movie and everything, because just in the beginning you think she's kind of a damsel in distress, just her dad was assassinated, and the movie kicks off with like a funeral service for her dad being blown up and shit, and you're just like, that's a crying shame that her dad was the victim for a mission that Bond was helping and was an instrumental part of. And then when you get towards the end of the movie, you find out this was all just a setup for her to get a monopoly on the oil lines. It's just kind of genius, and it's interesting as well too, because at the end when Bond's chasing her around the base that she's taken up in and everything, just she kind of tempts Bond and basically kind of makes fun of him, going, "You can't fucking kill me," and then just sort of like a real twisted moment, just Bond just realizes that he cannot save her from her own dysfunction and just shoots her dead. But after he does, he feels fucking terrible for it. Kind of an interesting dynamic for a character who's both a Bond girl and a villain.
There's a lot to like about this Bond girl. You mentioned most of it. She has a very interesting backstory, the entire twist that's involved with her in this movie. So I think she's fascinating as this Bond girl / villain. My big problem with this character, as complex as she is and as interesting as she is, she just turns into a standard supervillain at the end. You couldn't even dance around a little bit with it. Is it Stockholm Syndrome? Is she just crazy who just killed her father because she wanted revenge or she wanted the oil? They just kind of went, nah, she's just bad. Like, you have this really fascinating dynamic going on in this movie. That whole sequence with her, the torture chair with Bond, is, on the one hand, it's like the visuals of it is like, that's really cool. The other is like, well, now you're just giving into the villain part here, and any kind of thing that made me feel bad for her is gone. This is not somebody who has Stockholm Syndrome. This is somebody who clearly just masterminded the whole thing, and I think that's pretty disappointing. Even so, I think she's a fantastic Bond girl. It's just that one thing that just ruins it. The next one is Dr. Christmas Jones, played by Denise Richards. Have at it.
Oh, man. Start off with, like, her just in the radiation suit and going, just, she's going up, and then just, the minute she peels herself out of the radiation suit, she's in a tank top and shorts. And you're just like, we're going straight to the cheesecake, aren't we?
Yeah, essentially.
Don't get me wrong, she's got her moments where she's able to just exercise her intelligence and everything because she's kind of a nuclear scientist and whatever. You've got the moments where just she's sort of helpless here and there. It's just kind of one of those sort of situations where just you see her into like sciencey sort of moments, and then after things are cleared, that's pretty much it. As a throwback to the Roger Moore era, she appears at the end, humping around with Bond, and it's just like, really?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've made jokes about this in previous episodes. I've made jokes about it with you in private as well. She's not the worst Bond girl, but I will say that Denise Richards doesn't seem comfortable in the role. She doesn't sound believable as a nuclear physicist. She just doesn't sound right when she's talking about science and stuff like that, and she just sounds uncomfortable trying it. But I want to say this as well. I don't think that's entirely Richards' fault. There is nothing to this character at all. I think the best thing I can compare her to is, do you ever watch Galaxy Quest?
Yes, many years ago.
Okay, so you remember Sigourney Weaver's character and the joke with her?
Yeah.
That's this character. All she is there to do is look hot and explain things. That's all she's there to do. Other than that, she could have been written off entirely. This seems like a character that was written just so Bond can have sex with a woman at the end of the movie. That's it. That's all this character was for.
It also seems like she's sort of a game of conquest for Bond, because in the beginning, when she's introduced by one of the Russian guard staff, he basically kind of implies that she's lesbian, because he's just like, if you're trying to get a sparkle in her eye, forget it. She won't even look at a man.
Yeah.
And of course, it's just like you kind of see it's like reaction in Bond, like, oh, really?
Yeah. On the one hand, I really do want to clown on Denise Richards in this character, but on the other, I just don't think she even had the opportunity in this. I think there's nothing to this character. And even if you are a multi-award-winning actress, you're going to have a hard time with a character that gives you nothing. All it is I need to look good in these clothes, run around, and then make out and have sex with Bond in the end. You don't have them. Again, I just think the only reason she's here is to have sex with Bond at the end of the movie. And that's pretty bad in that end. Is she the worst Bond girl? No, but she's pretty close. I don't think that's entirely Denise Richards' fault, because she's actually done good in some movies. Wild Things she was pretty good in. Drop Dead Gorgeous she was good in. She is a decent actress, but she wasn't given anything in this movie, and it shows. I will say this. I guess if it wasn't for the fact that she's in this, we wouldn't get that terrible fucking line at the end, which is Christmas doesn't just come once a year. Oh, God.
Oh, what a terrible, corny one-liner right there.
That's like an incredibly crude dad joke. Zero, spy action. Let's go.
Action is in here by the spades. I mean, just the intro sequence, holy crap. My God, it just starts right off the get-go, full throttle, pedal to the floor, and you're just like, oh my God, so much action.
Yeah.
Just everything about the action's just real intense and everything. There are some spy sequences, but they're kind of few and far between, and it's kind of a complaint I had with the previous movie too, but I just wish that there was more spy and espionage sort of sequences instead of just action.
I think there's more spycraft than I think you're giving it credit for. I'm not saying there's a lot of it, but this is a movie that tried to actually tell a story with interesting characters, which is, I think, something that hasn't been in many Bond films. And because of that, I guess it seems a little sparse, but I think the spycraft elements are actually woven into the story a lot more in this.
Actually, I've got one good thing. There is one sequence that is kind of interesting, mostly because it shows that M does actually have fieldcraft chops instead of being sort of a accounting type and numbers jockey. When she's imprisoned in the fortress that the enemies are held up in and everything, she ends up asking for the time because the clock that she was watching when she's supposedly supposed to die had fallen over. And Zakis foolishly brings the stool closer to her with the clock, and it just kind of makes like a one-liner saying, you're gonna die soon enough anyway, so whatever. So she cleverly just takes the clock, guts the battery, puts the battery contacts onto 2 wires of the GPS locator card to basically kind of like tell Bond where she's holed up in and everything. And I was just like, okay, that's kind of cool, because in the past movies, a lot of the M characters have always been hey, this is your assignment, get it done, and don't be fucking sloppy about it. And in this one, she actually kind of shows that, hey, she's actually got some actual field chops and knows how to kind of try to get reinforcements or try to set something up so she can get out of a jam.
I agree with you. The action's very good in this. You mentioned the ones before the opening credits. They're the best action scenes in this movie.
Oh, yes. Holy cow.
Yeah, definitely. I think the ending action sequence between Renard, Bond, and Jones was kind of boring and a disappointment. I think it was a big letdown. I agree the action works, but I think the espionage elements are really the highlight of the film. I think they are actually really well done, because the movie tries to tell a very intricate story. I could say it somewhat succeeds, but I think the action and the espionage carry the film. So let's get into theme song and opening credits, which is The World Is Not Enough, composed by David Arnold, lyrics by Don Black, and performed by Garbage.
The intro credit sequence itself is pretty good. The CG is a little better this time around. I don't know what it is, just thought Garbage's performance was fine, but I don't know why I just struggled to remember the song.
You had the same problem I had. You had the exact same problem I had, because at the end of the movie, I was writing the review that I have on my website, IamTheWiz.com. Immediately when I got to this point, I was like, wait a minute, I don't remember anything about the opening sequence. I was like, oh shit. But yeah, I had the exact same problem. So that led me to rewatch it, just to remember everything. And what I will say about this is that I think the theme song is interesting because it sounds a lot like Bond music. Think about the other Bond film, the opening theme songs. They don't necessarily sound like the score, but I think in this one it really does, in a very distinct way. And it works, but it works because it blends in with the rest of the film, whereas the theme song is usually something that sticks out. Like in other Bond films, the opening theme song doesn't really blend very well with the rest of the movie. That's why they seem so distinct. But in this, if you really listen to the music in the theme song, it sounds like they're using tracks from other Bond films, or they're mixing it in a sort of way. I liked it, but again, like you, I had to remember what it sounded like. And I think it's mainly because it just all blended in together.
Yeah, agreed. It's a shame because Garbage is a pretty great band, and I was just like, yeah, I was kind of the same way when I got to the end of the movie. I was just like, oh god, I forget what the intro song was about even. Was it just that forgettable? I was just like, I thought Garbage was fine, but holy crap, don't tell me that I just plumb forgot everything.
All right, Zero, conclusion time. What did you think about The World Is Not Enough?
God, I want to say this is a mission failure, mostly because Bacchus is an interesting villain with an interesting superhuman quirk, and he's just underutilized to that degree. Elektra is such an interesting Bond girl and villain at the same time, and yet they kind of just take the corny Saturday morning supervillain route with her towards the end, and it's just like, ah, oh, damn it. You guys could have done something so much more interesting with her at the end. Especially with the whole like Stockholm syndrome and masterminding a plan that would make her oil company the dominant oil company. Could have gone some interesting ways with her at the end, and they just didn't. Denise Richards just not being comfortable in the role from what it seemed like, and her just kind of doing some sciencey things here and there, and then being present for the end of the Bond movie for a Roger Moore style sex joke. It's kind of I mean, don't get me wrong, the action's great. The action's just fantastic and everything. There is some spy stuff, but it's not as much in balance with the action. If you're wanting an action-y Bond movie, this is gonna be fantastic for that. But if you're wanting something that's a little bit more spycraft and espionage heavy, maybe a little bit more of an intellectual thriller, this is not gonna be it.
I waffled back and forth on this one, just like I did with Tomorrow Never Dies as well. It's another one where I can't say it's a bad movie. But I'm going to agree with you that it's going to be a mission failure, and mainly for what you just said. A lot of the elements that work with caveats, and the things that don't work really don't work. You mentioned Renard, you mentioned Christmas Jones. I think this is the best that Brosnan has been as Bond, but even so, it's not great. It's serviceable, is probably the best way I can put it. But like the Bond girl, Elektra King, was fascinating to watch, was easily the best thing about this movie, and then they screwed it up at the end. And I think Sophia Marceau did an excellent job. I think she was believable on all fronts, even when they made her character ridiculous. She did a very good job in this. There's one other thing that I want to point out that I did not like about this movie, and that's what they did with M in this movie. Why did you spend the last two movies turning her into a spy master who doesn't take shit, who is disrespected all the time and has to show that she is capable in the job, and have her screw up so badly and turn her into such a fool in this movie that the villain completely hoodwinks her and she ends up getting her best friend killed? Why would you do that to this M specifically? Other M's don't do any of this. They just sit behind a desk and they give orders. I'm guessing the reason why they did this is because they have Judi Dench, and she is an excellent actress, and you would want to have her more in the movie. but then would you do this if this was a really good actor in this movie? I don't see them continuing with Ralph Fiennes as M moving forward and him pulling this kind of thing. I don't think this is going to happen in this one, so I really don't like what they did with M in this movie as well. But I'm with you. I'm going to say mission failure, but I'm also going to say I can see why people might enjoy this movie. It is fun. It's got good action. It's entertaining in that sense, but with most of the elements, it's a miss.
I'm actually going to kind of clarify that this isn't to say this is a completely terrible movie, but if you're looking for like the big picture things about what makes a good Bond movie, the action part is great, but there's just so many holes on things that just really ruin the entire picture.
I agree with you 100%. So, mission failure?
Mission failure.
Mission failure for The World Is Not Enough. Now, if you want my full review on this movie, you can go to my website at IamTheWiz.com. You'll have my full written review right on the site, along with a link to the video that has this review that you've just listened to. Thank you for listening to this review. If you want to know what we're reviewing in the next couple of days, you can look on the screen right now to see what's coming up next. If you like what you heard, go ahead and leave a like on this video. If you want to discuss your opinion on the film or the review itself, please leave a comment. And if you want to hear more, subscribe to the channel. Thank you again for listening. I will talk to you next time.